I'd like to begin by acknowledging the survivors in this room, the survivors who are watching everywhere, the survivor we just listened to, the two survivors we just listened to, and also say Your Excellencies, Congresswomen, Congressmen, ladies, gentlemen, and Ambassador Mathilde Mbokantabana, who invited us here. Thank you for having this day. So I join you today on this important commemoration to mark the 30th anniversary of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. And so in my remarks today, I would like to focus on justice and accountability efforts, not only as a recognition of the suffering of the victims, but also as a form of setting a historical record, preventing future genocides, and curtailing attempts to deny the past. From the outset, I must emphasize that my mandate is on prevention, not on adjudication. I cannot pronounce whether a genocide has occurred or is occurring, and neither do I have the mandate to make a determination if a particular situation amounts to genocide or other related crimes. This is the mandate of judicial institutions with the relevant jurisdiction. So I was in Kigali last week with the Minister, Honorable Minister of Justice, who is here today, and I had the honor to represent the Secretary General, but also work and with UN colleagues on the ground and join the official Kwibuka 30 commemoration of the genocide against the Tutsi. I was moved by the sorrow and commitment to remembrance of what should have never happened and will never be forgotten, and by the unequivocal commitment to prevent the errors of the past and build a future grounded on peace, prosperity, and reconciliation. Rwanda is, of course, not new to me. I am from the region, and I worked in Rwanda before I joined the UN. And I worked in Rwanda at a time when the genocide had just happened, so I'm very familiar and very grounded in terms of what needs to be done so that this genocide against the Tutsi never happens again. So Kwibuka 30 invites all of us to mourn the victims and reflect with the survivors, the millions whose lives, dreams, and aspirations were irrevocably altered by senseless violence, which built upon calls with the explicit intent to destroy an entire group, the Tutsi, based solely on their identity, based solely on who they were. So the scars of the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda are still embedded in the tissue of the society in the world, and survivors continue to tell their stories and must continue to do so, so that what happened is never forgotten or repeated. And we too must recognize our collective responsibility to keep preventing genocides from happening, and especially not to those it's already happened before. So I have expressed consistently for 3 years now growing concerns around persistent patterns of denial of the crime of genocide that happened to the Tutsi. Denial of genocide is an affront to the victims and an attempt at denying the right of remembrance to those who died. There is a pattern to denial of not just the Srebrenica genocide that happened in 1995 and the Rwandan genocide that had happened a year before in 1994, but also the Holocaust. There is a similarity. The arguments are the same. The template is the same. So the deniers ignore historical facts and judicial decisions, and the deniers actually have networks. They actually meet. So we must too realize that this is happening, and we must stand up against these deniers. So we do know, though, that justice continues to be done, and holding perpetrators accountable for their actions remains as important as ever. Last year, I issued a statement welcoming the arrest in South Africa of Fulgence Kayishema, one of the world's most wanted suspects of the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. I also welcomed the verdict delivered in France, sentencing Philippe Hategekimana to life imprisonment for the crimes of genocide and crimes against humanity committed in Rwanda in 1994. Just a few weeks ago, another suspect, Eric Nshimie, was arrested in Ohio in the United States and is being accused of allegedly concealing his direct involvement in the killings of the Tutsi in Rwanda in 1994. So my message for Kwibuka 30 has been a call to all member states to facilitate justice and not to impede it Because despite these efforts, many suspects, and indeed more than 1,000 people indicted for the genocide against the Tutsi, are still at large, with some of them living what we call normal lives without any fear of being brought to justice. And they are living in member states of the United Nations. We do know what justice does. Justice brings strong visibility on the facts that happened, and in turn permits all of us to build defenses against the dangers of genocide and genocide denial. So for the last 3 years since I took up this position, for my first year when I joined, I asked the permanent representative in New York, Ambassador Valentine, I asked her, why are we not calling this genocide by its proper name? What is this Rwandan genocide? Yet we have a General Assembly resolution that names it as what it is, the genocide against the Tutsi. And so I began, through my office, a tradition of calling it by its proper name, the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. Put out statements, put out videos, wrote letters to UN colleagues, wrote letters to people everywhere and said, we must call this genocide by its proper name, because genocides are identity crimes, and the Tutsi were targeted for extinction. Anyone else who died, and we do know that there were Hutu who died, who opposed this genocide. We do know there were other people who died who opposed this genocide, but they were not the target. The target was the Tutsi. They would not have been killed if the intention was not to kill the Tutsi. So I say this so many times everywhere. The proper name of this genocide is a genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, in which Hutu and other people who opposed it were killed, but the key target was the Tutsi. That was my message for Kwibuka 28. For my message for Kwibuka 29 was on genocide deniers, because that's when we began realizing how connected genocide deniers are, how interlinked the genocide deniers of the Holocaust, of Srebrenica, of the Muslims in Srebrenica, and of the Tutsi in Rwanda, how connected they are, how they even write together peer-reviewed papers, and how they enable, when you Google or when you're looking for what happened in the genocide against the Tutsi, that then what comes up is what they are putting together. So that was my message. So this year, my message is on the impeding of justice. Why do we still have people living at large? Why? Can you imagine if you know somebody who has killed one person, one? If you know one murderer, would you shelter a murderer? You wouldn't. So how come people shelter genocidaires? They've killed more than 1 million people, they've killed thousands of people, yet we shelter them. We must keep asking ourselves this question. And that really, indeed, is the crux of the complexity of genocide, that people feel that they can actually shelter somebody who's killed all these people. So on Kwibuka 30, I reiterate my call to prioritize justice and promote judicial cooperation. This is essential to ensure that all those who need to be held accountable are brought to justice. The arrest of Eric Nshimiye here in the United States provides an example. And so those, especially who should be brought to book, include the genocidaires, the vast majority of genocidaires who fled to Eastern DRC in 1994, forming armed groups such as the FDLR, the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, which are still armed and active, and now target the Congolese Tutsi, both by continuing the genocide ideology that is fueled by hate speech, but also with violence, armed violence, with killings. I must say that in 2019, the Secretary General of the United Nations launched a strategy and plan of action for hate speech, and asked that my office leads in its implementation. And that when defining hate speech, because we have a working definition for hate speech in the UN, that we define hate speech as that which crosses the threshold of incitement to violence. So today, people who were born in 1994 are 30 years old. It's difficult to imagine. And I consider it very important to take very specific steps in a structured approach to pass the knowledge on preventing genocide so that young people stop referring to these genocides that have happened as history or as something that happens to certain categories of people. And so this includes promotion of education and remembrance as key tools against denial of past crimes, criminal accountability and adjudication of criminal allegations, trust building and reconciliation. So we must teach each new generation what the meaning of the word genocide is. That genocide, and I know it's a word that's so instrumentalized and weaponized, but genocide signifies a coordinated plan of action defined in the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide as intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, or racial or religious group, as happened to the Tutsi. Genocide is a process. It does not happen in a vacuum, and we continue to face the risk of genocide and other atrocity crimes in many parts around the world. So it becomes critically important to continue working to raise awareness about the lessons of the past to protect our populations from the crime of genocide and other atrocities. I always say that often we put it to the survivors to keep telling their story, to keep proving that it happened. And that what we must do is ensure that we become their voice. We must speak for them. It's so unfair to expect them to keep speaking for themselves. So 30 years ago, a genocide was perpetrated against the Tutsi. We must never forget the victims, and we must never forget this crime. Thank you.